Now available in paperback and Kindle, All About Marilyn. Learn all about the struggles of a faded former teen sitcom star in this absolutely fabulous 5-star screenplay. Get All About Marilyn in paperback and Kindle on Amazon.com today.
Hollywood Historical Couples in Crisis.
One of my viewers wanted me to do another installment in the Hollywood Historical Couples in Crisis series. And for this installment in the Hollywood Historical Couples in Crisis series, I'm going to be talking about legendary 90s musician Kurt Cobain and his wife Courtney Love. Now, the first person I'm going to be talking about in this Historical Couples in Crisis video is Kurt Cobain. Now, Kurt Cobain was an icon of rock music and was the frontman of the band Nirvana and was known for being what is called the sound of Generation X, as related to him being one of the greatest musicians of grunge music. Now, Kurt Cobain, even though he had great success as a grunge musician, was not happy as related to his entire life and was on the road to becoming a man in crisis ever since he was very young. Now, Kurt Cobain basically wound up on that road to becoming a man in crisis when he was 9 years old, and his parents wound up divorcing. And after his parents wound up divorcing when he was 9 years old, this is where Kurt Cobain went from being a very gifted young boy with a lot of promise as related to talents in art and music to winding up a very angsty and anxious young man who wound up sadly taking his life at 27 years old. Now, Kurt Cobain wound up on that road to becoming a man in crisis because the entire family structure that he had wound up falling completely apart around him, and that entire structure, as it fell completely apart around him, completely changed his personality all around. Now, Kurt Cobain, before his parents wound up divorcing, was a very happy young boy and basically enjoyed being in a home where there was a lot of structure and order. And as he was in that home with a lot of structure and order, he basically was encouraged by his grandmother, Iris Cobain, to go out here and focus on art. And his aunt basically saw, according to his aunt, he began singing at the age of 2, so he already had gifts as related to these talents, and at age 4 began playing the piano and singing, writing a song about the trip to a park. So he already had great gifts, and at a young age was sing songs like Arlo Guthrie's motorcycle song, The Beatles' Hey Jude, Terry Jack's Season in the Sun, and the theme song for the Monkees TV show. So he had a lot of gifts and talents at an early age, but because there was no family structure to nurture those gifts, what happened with Kurt Cobain is that as he saw the structure that he had and the love that he was given by his family taken away, he basically felt betrayed by his parents, and that betrayal made him feel ashamed of his parents because he wanted to have a family, and he wanted to have that security as related to his own personal security, because when it comes down to small children basically want that security of their parents, that they know that they will meet their needs. And sadly, with Kurt Cobain at 9 years old, that whole world as related to the trust that was supposed to be built was taken away from him. And as that trust was taken away from him and he went from being secure to insecure, he felt betrayed by both of his parents, and he felt betrayed by both of his parents. So what happened with Kurt Cobain is that after he was given to his father as related to the custody. He and his relatives, his brothers and sisters, basically were given into the father, and the father promised not to marry another woman. However, he wound up marrying Jenny Westby, and that basically made Kurt Cobain feel even more betrayed as related to the entire collapse of his family structure. And this situation would get progressively worse as related to things. It would get progressively worse because what would happen is that Kurt Cobain was in this household basically just trying to do the best that he could, but eventually what happened was that as his father and his new wife went out here and gave birth to another boy, Chad Cobain, this was basically the thing that basically destroyed Kurt Cobain as related to the trust, because he went from being the only boy as related to his stepmother to her now focusing on this stepmother. And what made things even worse is on his mother's side. His mother then got involved with an abusive man, so he had no place to go for a refuge, and he even saw the domestic violence inflicted upon her. So he basically went from being in a healthy family to seeing dysfunction placed around him, because as his mother was out here getting beaten up by this dude, he broke her arm, and she refused to press charges, and stayed committed to a dysfunctional relationship. And this made him lose respect even further for the authority of the members of his family, made him lose even more respect for the members of his family as related to his parents, because he could not trust them to provide him with security, and basically started lashing out and taking things out on people. This is where he looked to bully a boy at school, and this is where the father and his stepmother took him to a therapist, and that therapist basically further exacerbated the problem by saying he would benefit from a single family environment. Now, after they went out here and again tried to create the single family environment, they tried to reconcile Kurt Cobain's parents, but that wasn't going to work because the mother was already involved with a dysfunctional man, and he was already married to another woman, and Kurt was trying to cope with a very toxic family situation. And as he tried to cope with this toxic family situation, he became even more rebellious, because as he entered into adolescence, he basically felt he did not need to respect his father's authority because his father gave him no structure whatsoever. And eventually he wound up becoming so overwhelming that they placed him in the care of family and friends. And as he was in a home with a Christian man, Jesse Reed, and his family, Kurt became a Christian for a moment, but then later renounced Christianity, saying that he basically didn't want anything to do with God, in anti-God rants, and basically says that the whole situation with the Reed family basically was a guy who used religion as a last resort to keep him alive after the death of his girlfriend, to keep him from taking his life. And basically this is what he put in the song Lithium as related to his views on Christianity, which basically showed how lost Kurt Cobain was spiritually and was further down the road to being a man in crisis. Now, Kurt Cobain's father tried to give him structure as related to things by putting him in wrestling, but he didn't like wrestling. He didn't really like anything at all because he basically was hurt by his father, and again hurt by his father because his father broke a promise to him as related to that, saying he would not marry again. That basically broke Kurt Cobain's spirit as related to things and trusting people. He didn't trust any people at all, and basically further continued to be rebellious because he did not trust anyone in society, because the first two people who he needed to trust basically didn't go out here and establish structure for him at all. And because they didn't establish structure for him at all and maintain structure, this is what led to him becoming so chaotic that he made a blasphemous statement about God as related to being alphabet, and basically again would go out here and make all sorts of statements. And he drew during classes, and he drew all the time, but he again drew things that were very rebellious. And as he was in his rebellion, he basically was so out of control that he eventually went to live with his mother in a second year in high school. And after he lived with his mother in that situation with the abuse, this is where he realized he didn't have enough credits to graduate, and his mother gave him an ultimatum: find employment or leave. Then she put him out of the house, further making him more rebellious. And after being banished again, he stayed with friends, sneaking into his mother's basement. And then eventually, after again being homeless for some time, he then went out and when I was out here in these streets, basically again living under a bridge for a moment. And then in 1986, he basically again moved into an apartment by working at a Polynesian restaurant on the ocean shores for a while. Again, he was out here on his own, but then traveled to go to rock concerts, and then eventually he did the Pookie move, living in a home with a girlfriend, Tracy Miranda. And as they lived together, again, they started to have problems. Again, everything was strained because of financial problems. Their relationship really wasn't really good. It was like the Pookie and the black woman relationships, where the black woman is taking care of Pookie as he's got his plans for his rap career. And as things went on, he basically lived with this woman, and again went out here and again was out here working and they were working at the cafeteria at the Boeing plant in Washington, and they would steal food from the cafeteria. And then Kurt would spend his time sleeping into the late evening and doing art projects on the side. And eventually what happened with Tracy Miranda is that they were still living together in this situation as Kurt Cobain made his first album, which was called Bleach, was Nirvana's first album. And after they made the first album, she took the cover for the photo. So basically, he pulled the Pookie move as related to his overall start of his music. And then after this, he then participated in male hypergamy. After leaving Tracy Miranda, he began to date Toby Vale, a punk zinester of the Riot Girl band Bikini Kill. And again, after this, he then again went out here and again was caught up in this woman. And as he got a chance to get with her, he monkey branched over to her. And that's where he started to again continue to go on as related to his relationships. His relationships, basically, he was caught up in this girl, Toby Vale. Again, caught up in Toby Vale because she was again one of these alternative chicks, and basically she was a big wheel in that space. But it showed how he went from being a man who was out here on his own to basically living off women. Again, he was living like Pookie for a while, and as this was going on, he had started to get success with the band Nirvana. And as he got success with the band Nirvana, he basically started to become very successful. And as he became successful with the band Nirvana, this is where he went on to again get a mainstream contract. And after he got the mainstream contract, he just couldn't handle the success as related to things, because he basically again was not in a place where he could handle structure and order at all, couldn't handle structure and order at all as related to things, and had issues with things as related to handling that success. And eventually what happened with Kurt Cobain is that he became so overwhelmed that he started to have a mental breakdown. Starting in 1989, he had a nervous breakdown to the point where he just went and looked to attempt to take his life the first time, and was basically again wound up climbing down, but again then just went on to again continue with the rest of the tour, and was again having issues. And this led to him looking to escape through drugs and alcohol. And as he looked to escape through drugs and alcohol, he started to get involved with heroin. And as he got involved with the drug heroin, again this is what led to him having issues with addiction, and again had issues with addiction to the point where he basically, as he was getting his success in 1992, after they did the performance on Saturday Night Live, he had a near-death overdose from taking heroin. And again, the addictions were because he was looking to escape a life he was not ready and equipped to handle, because he did not really have good male life skills or male survival skills, because his parents really did not give him secure structure, did not really give him good order, really did not go out here and give him what he needed to be able to survive. And because of this is one of the reasons why he was looking to live off women and looking for them for support instead of looking to lead as a man. No, he didn't know how to lead as a man, because his entire ability to learn what he needed to be as a man fell completely apart, because his parents put their needs above their own children's. And basically, as things went on, again, Kurt Cobain, as he was trying to go on, he got involved with Courtney Love and eventually married Courtney Love, another deeply troubled woman. And as he got involved with this deeply troubled woman, his life basically was falling completely apart, even though he was at the peak of his success. Even though he was at the peak of his success, he basically, again, was dealing with this stress as related to trying to maintain that success because he had never reconciled the issues he had from that divorce in his childhood. And I go in depth on this in my book, The Man Crisis, in a chapter called The Divorce and the Man Crisis, because divorce really destroys boys and as related to them, because boys at an early age need structure, boys at an early age need order, boys at an early age need a father and mother to provide them with emotional and mental security, and without that security, they wind up falling completely apart, and that's what sadly happened to Kurt Cobain. And he basically, again, overdosed on drugs not only in 1992 after Saturday Night Live, he basically overdosed in his home in Seattle. And basically, Courtney Love, his wife, had to call paramedics, and he was then discharged the same day after taken to the hospital. And then he suffered another overdose in 1993. Again, his wife then injected him with Naxalone to try to bring him back, but then he continued to proceed to perform with Nirvana like nothing had happened. But he basically was out here taking heroin and looking to then take his life because he basically felt like he had nothing to live for. And as he felt like he was becoming more and more nothing to live for, even though he was getting more successful, in the 1994, Kurt Cobain was diagnosed with bronchitis and laryngitis, but then flew to Rome for medical treatment, and sadly there he overdosed once again on champagne on Rohypnol, and basically still on these looking to again escape life because he felt like he had nothing to live for. And he continued to go on and was again taken to another hospital, I think. And then after taken to another hospital, he then continued to look to take his life. Again, this is what he did with the Rohypnol and the champagne. That was where he looked to again basically first take his life deliberately. But he was a guy who had real serious issues. And in March of 1994, his wife called the police talking about how he was about to take his life, and he locked himself in the room with a gun. Police then arrived, confiscated several guns and a bottle of pills, and Kurt Cobain insisted that he wasn't looking to take his life, but locked himself in the room to hide from Love. But really, he was overwhelmed with life and the responsibilities of life, and Courtney Love was basically overwhelmed with Kurt Cobain and arranged an intervention in March of 1994, and people tried to talk to him, but he was just seething with anger, and eventually wound up exploding in a rage, and again locked himself in an upstairs bedroom. And he agreed to go to a detox program after the intervention, and then went out here and bought himself a shotgun, which he said was for protection. But this was the same gun that basically was the one used to take his life. This is what he asked his friend to buy Dylan Carson buy the shotgun for. And he bought the gun basically saying he wanted it for security, but he bought it to take his life. And as they flew to Seattle, again, one of the musicians of Guns N' Roses, who had animosity towards him, said that he knew that something was wrong with him because he was all happy to see him. And eventually what happened was, as April was going on, and around the rumors of Nirvana breaking up, the band pulled out of the Lollapalooza festival, and on April 8th, Kurt Cobain's body was discovered in his Lake Washington Boulevard home by an electrician who came to install a security system, and that's where they found a note that was detailing his reasons for taking his life, which was addressed to an imaginary friend, Buddha. And this is where Kurt Cobain said he had not felt the excitement of listening as well to creating music along with really writing for many years, and basically said this after taking his own life by shooting himself. And this basically was the end of the life of one of the most iconic musicians, Kurt Cobain, who was considered to be the spokesperson for Generation X, even though he was a baby boomer, and considered to be one of the icons of grunge music, considered to be one of the great icons of grunge music. But that icon of grunge music who made all of these angsty songs basically made all of that angsty music because he was a boy who grew up to become a man in crisis who never got to enjoy the abundance of life that God wanted to give him, did not know about how to enjoy life because of the destroyed family structure, And because of his destroyed family structure, Kurt Cobain had no love for life. And because he had no love for life as a boy, he grew up to become a deeply troubled and disturbed man who became one of the, even though he had great success, never had peace in this life and wanted to leave this life because he never had any sort of love whatsoever in his life. And this is what led to Kurt Cobain growing from being one of the greatest musicians of the 20th century to winding up becoming yet another man in crisis. Now, the next person I'm going to be talking about in this Hollywood Historical Couples in Crisis video is Kurt Cobain's widow, Courtney Love. Now, Courtney Love was the wife of the legendary Nirvana musician Kurt Cobain, and as they were married, they had a very tumultuous marriage, and that tumultuous marriage basically was just one part of a really troubled life of Courtney Love, who was just as much a woman in crisis as Kurt Cobain was a man in crisis. And Courtney Love wound up on the road to becoming a woman in crisis due to the dysfunctional home that she sadly wound up growing up in very early in her life. Now, Courtney Love's parents were people who were in the arts. Courtney Love's mother was Linda Carroll, who was a psychotherapist, and Hank Harrison, who was a road manager for the Grateful Dead. And her parents wound up meeting at a party for Dizzy Gillespie in 1963 and eventually wound up getting married after Linda Carroll found out that she was pregnant. And after she found out that she was pregnant, this is where Linda Carroll just decided to possibly marry this guy, Hank Harrison, out of obligation and not out of love. And that was what led to Courtney Love possibly winding up on a road to becoming a woman in crisis due to the dysfunctional home life that was established for her at the beginning. Because when two parents come together out of obligation and not love, what happens is that whole marital situation is doomed to wind up failing. And it winds up failing because they are not there because they really want to be there. They're there just out of obligation because they had a sexual encounter and had a child. And they're not really there to care for the child out of true love, but out of obligation because they realize they made a mistake. And instead of them understanding that, again, a child is made from love, they basically create dysfunction for the child, and the relationship winds up completely deteriorating. Now, in the case of Courtney Love, what happened here with Hank Harrison is that he, I believe, participated in passive-aggressive behavior as her mother alleges, Linda Carroll alleges. She alleged in 1970, when she looked to divorce Hank Harrison, that he allegedly dosed his daughter Courtney with LSD when she was a toddler, and went out here and had people testify to this, like some of his girlfriends, because he was still seeing other women. And this whole allegation and the allegation of saying he was going to abduct his daughter and flee to a foreign country, this is what led to his custody being revoked and took Courtney further down the road to becoming a woman in crisis, because without any sort of family structure whatsoever, Courtney did not have any sort of security whatsoever. And without that structure of security that a healthy family has, what happened with Courtney is that she grew up to become extremely dysfunctional as her mother, Linda Carroll, as a single mother now, took her daughter down to Maricola, Oregon, and where they lived along the Mohawk River, where she completed her psychology degree at the University of Oregon, and then looked to marry another man, Frank Rodriguez, who legally adopted Courtney Love, and basically maintained a very dysfunctional home with hippies running around naked and doing all sorts of Gestalt therapy, and then living and then raising her in a gender-free household with no dresses, no patent leather shoes, no canopy beds, nothing feminine. And as she was growing up in this home, she went to a Montessori school where she struggled socially because she had no structure, she had no order from her mother, who basically was living this hippie-type lifestyle, and began seeing psychiatrists because she was struggling academically and socially, and it was all due to her mother, again, putting her in a home life that basically messed her up, Now, the psychologist says she exhibited signs of autism and tactile defensiveness, but that could have been, again, due to the dysfunctional home that she was in. Again, they diagnosed her as autistic, but again, she was basically in that, it was that home environment that basically stunted her growth, that toxic home environment created by her mother, remarried this man, Rodriguez. But in 1972, she wound up divorcing this man, further exacerbating the situation, and then married a sports writer, David Meanley, and again moved to New Zealand, and where she was again sent to the Nelson College for Girls, but then was expelled due to misbehavior due to structural issues. And then after this, her mother then sent her back to Portland, Oregon, to be raised by her former stepfather and other family friends. And again, this lack of structure basically caused a lot of chaos in Courtney Love's life, and eventually she was arrested for shoplifting from a store and remained at a correctional facility for some time, but then again got involved with started listening to records from Patti Smith and the Runaways and the Pretenders, and this music again inspired her to start a band. But then she was placed in foster care until 1979, until she was emancipated in 1980 and was estranged from her mother, who basically she wouldn't want anything to do with, because her mother basically betrayed her the same way Kurt Cobain's father betrayed him when he made that promise not to marry somebody else, but then wound up marrying somebody else. Basically, Courtney Love was abandoned by her mother, and after being abandoned by her mother, Courtney Love, after getting emancipated in 1980, began working in Japan as a topless dancer, but was deported after a passport was confiscated, then continued to be a stripper working at Mary's Club, changing her name from Courtney Harrison to Courtney Love. And after she changed her name to Courtney Love, again, she then looked to use this name as a stripper name to conceal her identity, and again, then went out here working odd jobs like a DJ at an alphabet disco. And even though she had lacked social skills due to the environment she was raised in, she eventually learned these skills as she was working in alphabet clubs and spending time with drag queens, and eventually wound up enrolling at Portland State University, studying English and philosophy, and then said that she still had a passion. If she didn't have a passion for music, she would look to work with children. Now, in 1981, Courtney Love got a small trust fund that had been left to her by her grandparents, and used that money to travel to Dublin, where she basically found out where her biological father was living, and then took courses at Trinity College, studying theology for 2 semesters, receiving an honorary patronage from Tufts Trinity University in 2010, but she still studied things, but then went out here and she met a musician, and he let him stay at her place. Again, her life basically mirrors that of Kurt Cobain in many ways, and as she stayed with this musician, Julian Cope, she basically was living with him, and then again was living with other artists. And again, while they didn't want them to stay, they had no place to go. And as she did this, she basically eventually again was just hanging out there, just drifting around, then moved back to the United States. And then as she moved back to the United States after attending a Faith No More concert in San Francisco, she convinced the members to let her start singing, and she did some material with them, but they fired her. And then eventually they fired her because the band wanted a male energy. But then she went back to stripping briefly in Taiwan, and then in Hong Kong, and then eventually it was in Hong Kong that she first used heroin at the Hong Kong dance hall, mistaking it for cocaine. And that's where she was looking again to use these drugs to escape the very tumultuous life. And she eventually ran into a simp who basically looked to have her come back with him to the Philippines. He gave her some money for some new clothes, but she used that money to go to the United States, basically tricking the simp. And after this, she then decided to go into film. And as she went into film, she took a job at Paramount Studios, and took a job at Paramount Studios, again, cleaning out the wardrobe department of finished pieces that had suffered from dry rot or other damage. So she basically just got a job and then got into vintage fashion. And after she got this job, she then went out here and then went back to Portland, doing short-lived musical projects with friends like Ursula Werr and Robin Barbour, who were known as Sugar Baby Doll. Then formed Faith No More for their first appearance in a Susie Sue type music on TV, and still went on to again go into an acting career as she was doing different music projects. And again, she basically was doing just different jobs, just drifting here and there, just drifting here and there, and really with no real direction. And eventually wound up getting into films where she started in two movies. She did one movie called Sid and Nancy, and another one, Straight to Hell. Basically, these films, they were not that great, but the whole thing is that one of them caught the attention of Andy Warhol, and as it caught the attention of Andy Warhol, he featured it on 15 Minutes, Andy Warhol's 15 Minutes, which was related to his statement 15 Minutes of Fame. And she also had a part in a Ramones music video called I Wanna Be Sedated, appearing as a bride. And even though she had gotten some little notoriety as related to acting, she abandoned her career in 1988 and went back to being a stripper, possibly because it was very, very unstable to be an actress. I mean, the jobs, they come here and there. And eventually then decided, after being a stripper, when she was recognized by people, she decided to move to Alaska for 3 months to get herself together. And she had basically was just drifting around with no real direction. And then eventually she started playing music once again, and eventually started to form the band Hole. And as she formed the band Hole, she basically had her first marriage to a guy who basically married as a joke. She basically married this guy, James Moreland, in Las Vegas, but the marriage was annulled. And again, she then continued pursuing a romantic relationship with another guy, Eric Erlandson, as related to things and other people out here. And again, was still just drifting around with no real direction. Even though she had formed this band Hole, she was still, again, making music. And as she was making music, eventually she then got involved with Smashing Pumpkins' Billy Corgan, then got involved with Kurt Cobain, and eventually wound up again getting involved with Kurt Cobain to the point where they eventually became a couple in 1992. And after they became a couple in 1992, they wound up getting married on Waikiki Beach in February of 1992. And Kurt was wearing plaid pajamas, and she wore a satin and lace dress owned by actress Frances Farmer. And they basically, as they got married, they went out here and continued on with their careers. And as time went on, again, continued to go on. And eventually, what happened in 1992, Courtney Love wound up having her daughter, Frances Bean Cobain. And after they had their daughter, they basically, again, relocated to Washington, then Seattle. And their relationship basically became chaotic because of the addiction that Kurt Cobain had as related to heroin. And also, Courtney Love was also dealing with issues as related to drugs, as related to heroin, and said she quit drugs after she found out as she was pregnant. And as she was struggling to deal with this whole marriage, basically this was the thing that possibly could have been a factor as related to Kurt Cobain's mental state, was being overwhelmed by the responsibilities of fame and being a father. This could have been one of the issues that basically led to Kurt Cobain having issues that led to him taking his life. And in 1994, he basically wound up taking his life. And as things went on after Kurt Cobain's passing, again, Courtney Love still went on. And as they went on, she still had issues. She still had issues as related to things. Now, Kurt Cobain was cremated, and a part of his portions were basically divided into portions by Love, who kept some in a teddy bear, some in an urn, and then had some of his ashes buried by and blessed by Buddhist monks and mixed into clay and into memorial sculptures. And the whole thing is that as Courtney was going on, she was building up a momentum as related to her band, doing tour stuff, and basically doing things as, again, things was going on with her life. She was out here frequently, as she was doing a series of concerts. She was doing things like being hysterical on stage, stage diving, getting into fights with audience members, again, participating in a series of antisocial behavior, and then was eventually arrested for getting into a fight with a flight attendant, and also was in dealing with different situations as related to her career. It was basically, again, she went from going to do music and then went back into acting, and she starred in some feature films like The People vs. Larry Flint, where she got a Golden Globe nomination, and went on to star in more movies and continue to act, and starred in a film, I think, called Celebrity. Continued to go on, made her next album Celebrity Skin. So she still went on with her career, even though she was a woman in crisis, a woman still in crisis, because she had a lot of issues to the dysfunctional home she came from. The dysfunctional home she came from basically didn't give her any sort of structure, and sadly with Courtney Love, her life, even though she has success, still has a lot of chaos going on, in her life. And that chaos basically is because she didn't have that structure in her life early from her mother, didn't have that order in her life from her mother to teach her female life skills and female survival skills. No, she learned how to scavenge and survive on her own. And sadly, with Courtney Love, she basically was the perfect partner for Kurt Cobain. They were both men and women in crisis who came together, and even as they were dysfunctional, became together to become a dysfunctional couple that basically was one of the most dysfunctional couples of the early 90s, and was a textbook example of what happens when men and women in crisis come together. They basically, again, mirror their behaviors of their parents, because with Courtney Love, she basically is in the same place that she was as related to her daughter. Her daughter Frances Bean Cobain followed down the same road of her mother and father. Again, it's like intergenerational dysfunction that's passed down from generation to generation, because if there is no healthy family structure, you don't get a healthy family. No, all you get is a family in crisis, where you get children of the corn, and those children of the corn grown up to become generation after generation of boys and girls who grow up to become men and women in crisis. Now, if you want to learn more about the dysfunctional behavior of men and women in crisis, you can pick up my book, The Man Crisis and the Woman Crisis, on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find The Man Crisis and the Woman Crisis at other online booksellers like Draft the Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. And if you'd like to see me make more videos about Hollywood historical men and women in crisis, you can send a donation for a minimum of $15 to the PayPal or the Cash App by clicking the link in the description.
Now available in paperback and e-readers, All About Nikki, a fabulous first season. The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air meets Clueless in this absolutely fabulous African-American 1990s teen sitcom. Get all 13 episodes of All About Nikki, the fabulous first season, in paperback and e-readers today. Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, The Man Crisis. Learn why so many men are struggling to find their way in an increasingly gynocentric world in The Man Crisis. Get your copy of The Man Crisis in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today.
Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.